This episode will discuss topics concerning suicide, depression, and sexual assault, among other things. Viewer discretion is advised. If you or a loved one is suffering from depression and may be at risk, do not hesitate to call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. You can and will get through this.
Welcome back to MoDiv Talks. We have a few announcements today, which is first, we're looking for more Modern Divergence members. So if you're interested in writing articles or helping with our podcast, make sure to contact us through our Instagram or email, which is moderndivergence@gmail.com. Secondly, in collaboration with Planner Consulting and LaunchTech, we're partnering with them to create AveryBot, a mental health texting bot for ranting, confessions, or just for your personal use.
Today we'll be covering the topic of toxic masculinity, which is described by the ideas about the way that men should behave, which are seen as harmful. It can cause men to try to conform to the more traditional masculine gender role, which results in more violent, unemotional, and often sexually aggressive men, and so forth. Today we'll be discussing the many ways this mentality has manifested and become a significant part of American culture, and really culture all over the world, and dive into the impact of how it has impacted the mental health of men across the country. We'll have 3 acts, including gender norms, sexuality, and our third act, incels. So let's get into it. Starting off with gender norms, there are a plethora of different ways in which many societies, particularly we're going to focus on American society, expect men to act. Now, a more popular one has to deal with the emotions that boys should portray. A popular saying is, boys don't cry. Boys should be stoic. They shouldn't be crying. They shouldn't show emotion. Because it's seen as a sign of weakness. But personally, I think that this actually contributes to the regression of emotional intelligence within men and could lead to things like depression and suicide.
So as you know, if you're unable to express how you feel, if you're unable to express that you're going through something hard or that you have some kind of emotional problems, then it'll be harder for you to deal and to talk to people about what you're going through. So since men are more, just this idea that boys don't cry, they're more vulnerable to suicide, depression, and just dealing with these things that no one should be dealing with alone because they feel like they can't express their feelings to anybody when that's really not true.
Yeah, and depression and suicide is something that thousands, maybe even millions of people across the world deal with every day. But when we have these ideals in which you're not allowed to have a sustainable emotional health, it can make you a lot more susceptible. Now, I have some statistics here. According to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, or AFSP, men in the United States last year committed suicide at 3.5 times the rate of women. Now, as we've talked about just now, this can be attributed to a lot of different factors. We're not saying that just the term boys don't cry is what's causing a bunch of men to kill themselves. But when you have this type of ideal that to be rather hard to live up to, because since we're human, one of the things that makes us different from other animals is that we have emotions. And if you aren't able to express those freely or are shunned if you do so and seen as weak, then these kinds of statistics can happen. Now, I want to look at the flip side of this type of narrative where women are seen as the ones who should be emotional, maybe overly so. I've heard from men in my life who say that if you're a man and you cry, you're acting like a girl. And I feel like a lot of different times, and we'll see more instances over this episode, that the things that are seen as bad in men that are seen as weak are correspondingly things that are seen as ideal for women. And so, what do you guys think about this type of mentality that weakness should be only associated towards women? Things that would be offensive in a man should be the ideal for women across the world.
I feel like it creates a divide between men and women, and they feel a lot more pressure to conform to particular roles. And this is definitely why a lot of this emotional regression can factor into some kind of repercussion for women as well. And I also feel that oftentimes, because this is an ideal, like ideals in and of themselves assume that everybody should be conforming to them, it kind of fosters this environment where men kind of do feel the need to pressure others. And because people only really see the pressure rather than what these men are actually feeling, they kind of just get stuck in this weird circle of them pressuring one another to conform to these ideals.
Exactly.
I feel like women who don't express in the way that women are supposed to, they're also receiving a backlash as well. Kind of tying into how women are seeing that they should be crying. I've seen a lot of times, like for example, after a woman gives birth, she's expected to cry. She's expected to be overwhelmed because of the birth of her first child, which you would never really ask of a father to be crying at the birth of his child, even though it's an exciting and important milestone for both the
Mm.
parents in that scenario. So when women don't cry, when women don't have this extreme emotional reaction, they're kind of shunned. They're seen as, well, are you not happy that you have a child now? Are you not excited? And I feel like that type of double standard is, can one kind of be attributed to toxic masculinity, but also kind of feeds to that toxic femininity, which we'll talk about more a little later. Now, Faith, you said you wanted to
Yeah,
add something.
there have been some evidence and some statistics that say that over the past 50 years, like for example, with all the mass shootings that we've been having, most of the time they wanted to kind of show that they like the people that they were being bullied by, that they were more masculine because they were bullied for being bookish, artistic, shy, or non-athletic. So these kind of violent responses are ways to prove their masculinity
Yeah,
or get revenge.
that you brought up mass shootings, because brings me to our next point, which is that men are typically geared towards more manly hobbies, which tend to be more aggressive, more physically involved, and I personally believe can lead to fostering aggression within men. Now, tying back into what you said about mass shootings, out of 108 mass shootings last year in the United States, between the years of 1980 and 2019, 102 of them were executed by men. Not saying that, telling your son to go play football or all these other things can lead to becoming mass shooters, but I do think that there's merit in taking a look at how we bring up our boys. Like, if we tell boys that you can't knit, you can't go draw, you can't go garden, you have to do this, that, and that, that's more aggressive, having these types of tendencies where a lot of these violent crimes are committed by men can happen. What do you guys think?
This reminds me of a video I saw on Instagram. So this mother took out her camera and started recording her child, who didn't seem maybe any older than, for example, 7 years old. And he was dancing to a TikTok song. And instead of telling him to stop or talking to him or anything like that, she slapped him on camera for dancing to a TikTok song because he was acting too feminine.
Mm, mm.
So not even I was just I was pretty shook. Like, not only did she think there was something wrong with him for just dancing, but she also had the time and the audacity to take out her camera to record it and try to gain, I'm not sure what she expected, views, followers, thank yous.
Hmm.
But when I saw that video, it really just showed me that, not everyone is fit to raise a child, especially in 2020.
I feel like the fact that many people aren't able to become more progressive, because I can definitely imagine a more conservative parent feeling like they're in the right to do that, but it's just a child and they're just dancing. There's nothing coded behind it. And honestly, I'm not going to put all the blame on the mother, because she's probably raised to have that type of thinking where, oh yeah, boys aren't allowed to do this. And that's really the main problem with this type of thinking. If it's generational, if you create someone's entire moral compass with this in mind, then you'll have instances like that. These types of statistics can be really scary because it's like, how do you stop that cycle? You know, how do you break this pattern of men being overly violent, of men producing these violent, horrid crimes? How do you stop it?
This example that you brought up, I feel it's really good to bring up because it does play ode to how men aren't naturally violent. It's just really something that's expected of them. And because we live in a culture that equates masculinity with physical power, a lot of these men and boys will feel like like they're feeling it as men. And so this kind of masculinity has created this vacuum in their lives that they feel like they should fill with violence to kind of fulfill their ideals of being a man.
Can you guys think of any other examples of toxic masculinity? I only came up with some baseline ones, but I mean, it's all over our way of life. So, can you guys think of any other examples?
Throughout my experiences of dealing with, men, boys who have problems with their masculinity or who are undergoing toxic masculinity, is that they have a lot of tendencies to mansplain. So if you don't know what mansplaining is, it's kind of unnecessary explaining something because you feel like as a man, you're entitled to like another description or something like that. And I've had to deal with this a lot working with guys in my school. There's just been so many instances and I'm just like, there's no reason to mansplain. You can calm down. Have you ever like dealt with anything like that? Because it just gets me so annoyed, like a lot.
Exactly. I feel like almost every girl has a story of being mansplained to, even if they didn't know it at the time. And I was talking about this last night with my sister, that in our culture, we kind of have this idea that men should be protectors more often than not. Like, have you ever seen, and I see this in movies and books and sometimes even in real life, how like, let's say your oldest is a girl, so your firstborn is a daughter, and then you have your youngest, a son. When they're growing up, the girl will have, superiority over him. She's the elder. But as you grow up, and once you guys are both of adult age, it becomes the sort of thing where, like, the son, even though he's the youngest, is supposed to be taken care of and be kind of like the protector of his older sister, defend her, things like that, which you would never expect in the reverse. Like, if you have an older brother, you're not going to be protecting, you're not going to be doing anything for him because you're, the daughter. And I feel like a part of having a protector or thinking that you should be the protector of somebody in your life is that you need to be more, you assume that you're more knowledgeable than them. And so it agitates me that a lot of boys have that complex, like, oh yeah, well, I just need to dumb it down for her. I need to give her in layman's terms so that she can be on equal standing because I'm the one who's knowledgeable about the topic. They always assume that they know better, and it's so aggravating. You're right, Faith.
Yeah.
All right. So Act 2 has to do with sexuality. And I'm not talking about sexual orientation, though I will highlight that homosexual men, other men of the LGBT community, do get a lot of backlash and suffer a lot of discrimination because being attracted to men, or I guess just not being attracted to women, is seen as a weakness, which I personally don't understand. But gay men, bisexual men, pansexual men, even transgender men all receive discrimination because going back to toxic masculinity, they're not seen as what we or the idea of men that has been posed by society. So focusing simply on sexuality, a lot of times in social media, whether it's books, movies, TV shows, there's often this trope that men are always looking for their next sexual partner. The playboy is an idolized figure. You have James Bond, you have Nerf, even Barney from How I Met Your Mother. The list goes on and on. And even though this archetype is seen a lot throughout pop culture, it's almost always more fiction than fact.
And I do want to touch on that, like what you brought up about them not really considering many trans men, many gay men in their general circle of what a masculine man is. I would like to say that a lot of this comes from a locker room mentality, and like because they see gay men as very threatening in these certain circumstances, and because many trans men aren't really invited to these spaces because they discriminate against them. It just makes it seem as though, there's like this very exclusive ideal for what a man should be to invited to this locker room scenario.
Even with like within the umbrella of like gay men, there's also like stigma mainly towards femme gays who are, who are more feminine, who, might be the ones who wear more makeup compared to other gay men who dance, who are really out there. That stereotypical idea of a femme gay.
Yeah, and I see a lot of arguments from straight men who say like, and honestly I feel like I would give more credit to how society has evolved, because I feel like this problem is a lot better than it was maybe in like 2010, 2012. But I see a lot of heterosexual men who say like, I can't help feeling uncomfortable around homosexual men, or just men who happen to be attracted to other men, because I just don't feel comfortable being around someone who could possibly be attracted to me. And I in theory that kind of makes sense, but I feel like men might only think like that because when they try to conceptualize, if they can't understand that other people are attracted, can be attracted to their same sex, they try to conceptualize um being around homosexual men in that type of manner, in a locker room manner, with like, well, wouldn't it be awkward if I was in a girls' locker room? Like, I'm attracted to women, wouldn't that be weird? And I feel like a lot of straight men need to realize that just because they're a guy and they're around a guy that is also attracted to men, that does not mean that they want to sleep with you. That does not mean they want a relationship with you. And so that type of fear is kind of irrational, and it only leads to more bad things than good.
Yeah, they're
Now,
definitely putting themselves on a pedestal.
Honestly, they sound so entitled, like literally so ridiculous for even thinking that. And it's just sad to see how deeply rooted toxic masculinity really is within them.
yeah, it also goes to show that like, if you are so afraid of people that could be attracted to you and what they could do to you, then how do you think females feel when men don't really do anything to acknowledge or validate when women tell them that they're being made to feel uncomfortable by the same men? um Now, Maxine, geez, you said something that I really wanted to touch on, and locker room talk.
Yeah,
So and I don't know if you guys have any brothers. Let me know if you do.
I do.
Yeah, I don't know if he's older or younger, but I'll say personally, and I'm guessing because Faith didn't answer, she doesn't have an older brother, but like, particularly in my culture, is like Nigerian culture, the son is very, very idolized. It's very put on a pedestal, and I have the unfortunate pleasure of having my oldest sibling be my brother. My brother is my parents' first child, so on top of being the first kid, he's also the only son.
Mm.
And the types of leeway that he gets because of that are just something that us girls could never imagine. And I know that that's the same for a lot of different families when it comes to their sons. The way that they can be sexually promiscuous, like having a boyfriend. My brother had boyfriend. I mean, not boyfriends. Because he can act like a bonehead sometimes. But my brother had the pleasure of having relationships all through high school. He has relationships all through now, even though he's an adult. And he never had to worry about asking mom and dad, hey, can I go on this date? He just went. But if it were something like my sister, there's a funny story of how when my sister was 9 years old, she has a school project with our neighbor David. And my dad said that he was not allowed to come in the house. He was not allowed to be around her. And that they had to do the project over the phone.
Mm.
But meanwhile, my brother could go out all hours of the night. He was able to be with any girl he wanted. And I feel like that type of double standard, again, is toxic, because we expect men and we allow men to basically have any woman they want, to be allow that sexual freedom, but we don't allow the same thing for our girls.
That was such a wonderful point to bring up. Although I only have a little brother who is like still a baby, he's like 5 years old, So it doesn't apply exactly yet. I've definitely seen various ways, in exactly what you're talking about. When they have, compared to their female child, they'll be more protective. They won't let them go out. They'll just be more scared of, like, oh, you're going to get in this trouble. You're going to get pregnant. Don't sleep with anybody. But when compared to, for example, their male child, they might be like, be safe, wear condom, you can go out. They'll be more they'll be more accepting of letting them kind of express themselves, because they feel like there's less of a risk, because they're males, or that's just what they do, let boys be boys, and that kind of thinking.
I hate that term, let boys be boys. Because, like, let's just go
Yeah.
back into that. Like, how parents are very afraid for their daughters to be more involved romantically. Do you ever take a step back to think, why are you so afraid? If you raise your boys right, if you don't have this idea that, like, oh, well, if a boy tries to kiss you, you don't want it, he just likes you. If a boy's rough with you, that just means he likes you. If a boy tries to come on to you, boys will be boys. You as the woman have to try to deter him, instead of teaching the man that if a girl doesn't want to be with you, you need to respect that. The fact that we kind of put the pressure on the woman to fight off the man, instead of teaching the man from early on that you should not be aggressive towards women in any type of setting, especially a romantic or sexual setting, is the reason why parents are so protective of their daughters. And they shouldn't need to be protective of their daughters. They need to be teaching their men to be better. And until we can get the type of mindset that we need to make better men, not more apprehensive girls, then toxic masculinity will just continue to reign. There's more. Now, I just want to preface by saying that male sexual assault is, as any sexual assault, is a very, very serious topic. It's a very sensitive topic. It's especially one that doesn't receive a lot of attention, possibly because it doesn't happen as much as sexual violence against women, but it is still a major problem. And it's part of the reason that that toxic masculinity can very negatively impact men, because they feel as though, some people believe that men cannot be sexually assaulted. Some believe that you cannot rape a man, which I feel like is just outlandishly crazy. But like I will say right now, it happens, and it happens too much. Now, before I go into some statistics, do you guys have any comments, concerns, anything?
Definitely, any kind of sexual assault, any kind of rape, regardless of your gender, regardless of any of those demographics, it truly is wrong. And I definitely see how toxic masculinity can get in the way of this. It can get in the way of how you cope with getting over this. It can get in the way of looking for help. It can get in the way of telling others. That's already hard for a woman to do. Like, I can just imagine how much worse and repressed it is for males who are undergoing and repressed by this.
I
Women
actually
need to
have
be.
an article to bring up. It was by the New York Times. It's what happens to Me Too when a feminist is the accused. And so basically, this professor at, was it New York University? I don't remember, but Avital Ronell, she was accused of raping one of her male grad students. And basically, this male grad student, of course, there's like a huge power dichotomy between the professor, the female professor, and the male student. And you usually see this like oftentimes reversed in most cases of educational sex crimes. And what's so interesting about this case, well, what's so tragic about this case is that because this was a gender studies professor, everybody thought like, okay, it became like a whole conflict between the feminists and the anti-feminists. And it really does beg the question, because a lot of the people that came up actually defended the feminist professor, because they were saying, well, you don't really, I don't even remember what they were trying to argue, but they were basically just defending Avital Ronell. And Judith Butler, one of like the names in feminist scholarship, even went by her side. So there's like this huge power conflict going on right now between the feminists and the misogynists, and even those that just don't identify as feminists are starting to get really skeptical of feminism because of this. And so it really begs the question, like, should we be redefining our feminism, and should we be a lot more like, I don't know if any of you identify as feminist. I don't know if I do really right now, but we really need to, like, if we do choose to identify as feminist, like, can we make it a lot more inclusive so that we can also accommodate for the tradition, even like the traditionally masculine, and kind of reconcile it with a better understanding of like what it means to be a man, what it means to be a female in today's society.
I am a feminist, but I definitely get what you're saying, Maxine. Like, especially now, like the title of a feminist is so stained with people who consider themselves feminists but don't truly get the point of it. So, for example, like women who think being a feminist means not wanting equal rights for males too, just horrible conceptions of feminism, which really stains the whole perception of feminism and exactly what the feminist movement is trying to achieve. So with that, I've seen that as a feminist myself, I've seen many instances where males will feel like being a feminist means I don't think males deserve rights. So sometimes I'll be talking about a feminist issue and I'll see males start arguing with me, start saying, I'm not a feminist. What's wrong? Why don't you want equal rights? Or they'll get super defensive because they feel like I'm personally attacking their masculinity when that's really not what feminism is about. I forgot what the male topic is. Like, how feminism is more related to girls. There's like a more male version, but I forgot what it's called.
Meninism? Because that's what I've heard. Yeah, just like men's rights movements.
I
Yeah.
heard that, but I feel like it's just a play off of feminism, which, okay, I just want to start by saying, Faith, I really love how you put it when you said it's a stain. I used to not understand. I'm just going to say, I identify as a feminist. I never really understood when people would say they don't, because feminism, regardless of how it's been politicized and how the meaning has been tainted and changed over the past few decades, the meaning of feminism, and this, I'm going back to like first wave, is the movement to have equal rights between men and women. It is only called feminism because women have been marginalized for almost most of history, and I dare say all, because to this day, women are still being marginalized. Now, that being said, I will acknowledge that many people who consider themselves feminists don't embody this. And I would say this isn't unique to feminism. This is how it is for a lot of different oppressed groups. Instead of wanting equal rights, some may want to have that supremacy. They want to be able to benefit in the way their oppressors have for such a long time. So that's where you have these women, and also, I mean, surprisingly, men who will say like men don't deserve any rights. You have these women who just say men cannot be sexually assaulted, but then also consider themselves feminists. Which, if you inherently say that one sex cannot be sexually assaulted over the other, that's inherently sexist. So you cannot be a feminist if you have that belief.
Yeah.
Now,
and I find that me personally, as I mentioned before, I don't currently identify as a feminist, but that mainly stems from my experience within a lot of feminist circles. I've seen them all, from the TERFs, the trans exclusionary radical feminists. I think that's a good topic for another episode, but they're the TERFs and intersectional feminists. I love the intersectional feminists, and just everybody insofar in between. I've seen a wide range of feminism, and I think what we really need to do right now is try to find like a center point where all of them can like just be bridged together and like identify like this is what we're fighting for and this is what we want to do. But for now, it just seems like a community very divided in itself. And as somebody who can't make up their mind, that scares me.
yeah,
For sure.
it definitely is. Yeah.
So kind of straying from feminism, like we were saying before, meninism. So that's the term for, the men's rights movement. And personally, I feel like just like feminism has, its true positive and authentic side, where it truly is trying to advocate for both men and women's rights, melanism, which, can also be really true, can also be really authentic, where it's just males who really just want equal rights for everyone. But on the darker side of that end is the followers in feminism who are just there because they feel threatened by feminism, who feel like feminism is one-sided and is only helping females. So
Mm.
while I don't completely believe that feminism is something that's horrible or that shouldn't be there or something like that, I just feel like rather than a movement, it's a way for males who are feeling repressed.
I think that a lot of people need to understand that is that oftentimes a lot of Mennonists aren't really wrong per se, but a lot of them are just really uneducated about like the nuances that define what feminism. And oftentimes it does get to a point where they're like, okay, are Mennonists like advocating for men's rights, or do they just not want to see women's rights? Or is it somewhere in between? It's a very, very complicated issue.
That's a very gray area. And this might be a hot take, and I don't know. Maybe I'm a crazy feminist, like what some other people say. But I think that a lot of Menonism is just a play on it's just a parody of feminism, because, and I'm not saying this is only unique to men's rights or like the condition of being a man. I feel this is how it is with a lot of people who have historically been the oppressors. You can see this with white people as well, where in a lot of different respects, I would say it's very difficult to find male oppression. And I say that because in most circumstances within our society, men are the oppressors. It is very, very hard for you to find a situation where the oppressor can simultaneously be oppressed. Now, I will say, because I don't believe that in all respects the genders are the same. For example, I'm going to read a statistic here where 1 in 71 men are victims of sexual assault. 40.2% are gay, 47.4% bisexual, and 20.8% are heterosexual. Yet the true number of cases is estimated to be way higher. Now, that statistic is from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center, and this happens for many different reasons. In fact, a lot of different reasons can stem from when men go to report, the police don't believe them. Going back to what you said about that NYU student, taking away the genders, if you are in a position of power, such as a teacher, and you are vetting, I'm not saying this is what actually happened, but these are allegations, but if you are in the position of a teacher and you are vetting for a student, and even if they claim it is consensual, it is inherently unconsensual because you are in a place of power above that person. So it is not in the person being vetted, it's not in their best interest to deny you. And that's what makes it inherently unconsensual. And so when you take that away, the genders away from it, we can all recognize that at the least, that's sexual harassment, and at the most, that can become rape. But when you put in the fact that the male is the one being is the victim, and the woman is the one being the assailant, you can have situations where you ever see in TV where, and this usually happened like the 80s, where they'll have like a hot substitute teacher. Now, okay, a lot of times in these shows, we don't think about how that is rape. That's statutory rape. That is a minor, and their minor is as having sex with an adult. We don't think about it like that. We just see, oh yeah, the hottest guy in school got the hot substitute teacher. But if this were switched, if you had like, the cheerleader and she was sleeping with her male teacher, we would all appreciate the fact, or more likely than not, we would appreciate the fact that like that man is using her. That man is putting her in a situation that she can't really escape, and we would accept that statutory rape. Like in that respect, men have the downside. They aren't as freely able to come out with their sexual assault and be recognized and be validated in that sense. And it's even worse in the military, where men reign supreme, where 17% of men report their sexual assaults compared to 43% in women. And as we've seen in many different patterns, the margin of victims in the military are probably a lot more. But I would argue that the military is a place where toxic masculinity is at its highest. That being said, I feel as though men's rights in the first part is not it's a misguided community, because the idea that feminism is trying to take away the rights of men is inherently misguided, because it doesn't recognize how marginalized women are. Women wanting the same rights as men does not mean it doesn't mean anything towards men, really. I mean, you could think about the same thing as like white people who become very upset with affirmative action. There's no opportunity being taken away from you. It's just giving it to somebody else who right now is lacking in that department. But going back to the issue of men's rights, I think that is the perfect segue towards incels. Now, do either of you want to?
The word incel is defined primarily as a shortened term for involuntary celibacy, and it refers to a select internet community dominated mostly by heterosexual men, and they all seem to be rallied under this same frustration of not being able to sleep with women, and they've kind of based most of their crusades around that.
Yeah, because these women refuse to sleep with them, to be their boyfriend or girlfriend or something like that, rather than, just dealing with that, or just, coping with rejection like every other human. Rather, they insult them. They feel like women are inferior to them.
A lot of this
Yeah,
hatred stems from a place of very deep-rooted self-loathing, because oftentimes a lot of these incels consider themselves inferior to a lot of them, both the women that they find more attractive than them, as well as the guys that they dub chads, these alpha males, and they covet, like, they're having, for instance, like ideal bone structures and facial features. We can talk about bone structure in a while, by the way. That's like a whole thing. It's really weird, all the while scrutinizing their own physical shortcomings. So it makes you wonder, like, it kind of makes sense why they get to this point of self-loathing. It's definitely not something that should be tolerated, but it kind of makes sense.
yeah, it does make sense, but you don't see women who aren't conventionally attractive having crusades against men, saying they hate men, making threats towards men, etc., etc. I would argue that incels come from, like you said, self-loathing, but they also come from that inherent sense of male entitlement. The fact that you are entitled to having a woman. Now, I want to bring up this video that I saw, which I have to be honest, it made me laugh. Like I was cackling, where this guy was talking in the video about Me Too, and he was like, "It's always me too, me too, me too." But and then the guy said, "Nobody ever talks about the stupid whores who lie." Now, I hear this a lot. Surprisingly, not surprisingly, I try to stay away from any incel community as much as possible, but it does still find its way into my phone screen, etc. And you'll see a lot of arguments from men who consider themselves feminists and other men who consider themselves incels that, no one ever talks about the women in Me Too movement who lie, who make false rape allegations. And I feel like that's an example of how men will take something where they might be disadvantaged, an instance of where they might be disadvantaged, and use it not only to prove in some capacity that they are oppressed, but then also to use it in a way to then attack those who they perceive to be oppressing them. False rape allegations only make 2% of reported rape allegations. So 98% of the ones that are reported tend to be true. And that's not even the vast majority of the actual sexual assault cases that occur. Yet men will use that argument and use it to attack women in that way, calling them stupid whores, amongst other terrible things.
It's rather ironic and even comedic, in fact, that the reason that they're usually rejected or not liked by women is not because of their looks, not because of maybe they're too fat, they're ugly, nothing like that. It's usually because of their personalities, their entitlement, why they feel that they deserve to have a woman, the way they act towards women, they don't respect them. And it's usually that's usually the reason they're not liked by women, because deep down they do not respect women, and they don't have the personality that women deserve. They don't have the respect or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, you said it perfectly. they don't respect women. They see them as a type of object. I was on Reddit the other day, which is like a hotbed for incels, and on Reddit you could see these men who describe their ideal woman, who their dream woman would be, the type of woman they would want to be with, and the descriptions of them are just honestly laughable and sometimes despicable. They usually describe them as
Femoids.
pale, females, pale, weak, needing a knight in shining armor, having very, very feminine features like big eyes, but like also very sexual features. Not someone who would be more submissive, someone who really wouldn't fight back, who would just go along with whatever that particular man wanted to say. And wanting a partner in that way means primarily that you don't want to have a person as your partner. You want someone who will just comply. You want a pet, basically, just in human form that you can probably have sex with, I guess. And I feel like that's why I always hate when you hear men who say, "Oh yeah, nice guys always finish last," because I'm just like, nice guys don't finish last. If you're a nice guy, you won't care that a girl doesn't want to be with you. You'll just continue on with your day because it's not the be all end all. It gets to the point where like you feel as though a girl owes you something, whether that be sex or a relationship, just because you treated her like a human being and treated her with consideration.
But I do think that bringing in like that realm of physical attraction is also something really big to the incel community. Like they have this entire list of incel lingo that they use within the community, much like any other 4chan or Reddit thread that you will find. But like to the incels, oftentimes like physical attractiveness is this thing that's naturally distributed equally between the sexes. And this kind of does tie back to the point that you guys brought up about entitlement. So they really like using numerical rating systems, and they like them because they don't have a lot of subjectivity within them. It's just like, this girl's an 8, this girl's a 7, and it definitely helps them justify that, like, in the ideal world that they live in, like for instance, a 7 out of 10 men would be able to land a 7 out of 10 woman. And this entire effect kind of permeates the incel ideology. And I just find it really interesting how they can narrow everything down to like a few set factors for what a 7, or what an 8, what a 9 is.
Well, I mean, yeah, because when you think about it, they're treating these women like they're products. Like this isn't a Yelp page, this isn't an Amazon page where you can just be like, "Oh yeah, 7? Her, she's a 9 out of 10."
Going off of that, I find it super ironic how they go by, they like in their name it says celibate, right? But most of the reason, like literally what they're just out here fighting for is that the fact that they've been shunned by women. That's not what celibacy is. Like, where does that name come from? Because that's not what celibacy is.
First part of the word, though, involuntary celibacy. They feel like they're being robbed of it, and that they feel like they need it. Like they're celibate, but they don't really want to be celibate.
I feel like it's truly sad because, everyone comes, well, most of everyone comes from, their mother. And for them to be out here just advocating that they deserve, a relationship, they deserve sex, that they're superior to women, it just feels so sad for me to watch that, especially when they were given birth to by their mother, someone who probably cares for them a lot, who has provided a lot for them, yet they're still out here advocating for, for something that diminishes and degrades their mothers, the one who have probably given so much to them. That's kind of like the biggest part, or one of the most sad aspects of just the existence of incels to me.
Yeah, and I think that the way that post that was brought up earlier about how they describe women as femoids, it's like this very misogynistic verbatim, right? And it definitely summarizes the way that they view females, because they don't even see them as friends or the women that were responsible for raising them and giving birth to them. Instead, they kind of see them as like the spawn of their inner conflict, the reason why they can't live the lives that they want to, and why they exist the way that they do. And so they become objects, definitely, but more so than that, they become alienated to them. They don't even see them as human anymore. They're femoids.
Yeah. And I feel like a big problem with that, and you could also attribute this to toxic masculinity, is the fact that a lot of times females are their merit is largely and disproportionately based on their attractiveness. Whereas like I see a lot of times where like a guy who like I personally or many women personally wouldn't find that attractive feel as though they can land a girl who is way out of their league, and that if they don't they aren't able to, they just call the girl disparaging names and just say like I didn't like you anyway, things like that. And because women are based a lot of times they're based on their merit, men, and this is backed by toxic masculinity, men see it as okay to only vet women who they feel like can sexually please them and that is attractive to the eye. I was once watching this comedy special where like the guy said, and he was joking, I found it funny, but it's kind of a serious thing, where he was saying that a lot of times that boys and men think they just try to find the most attractive girl that they can land and then worry about personality later. That's why a lot of times you see guys like incels who just want the prettiest girl, who don't have the brightest mind, so that they can just project their ideals onto them, and then maybe they'll just have a yes man that also looks pretty hot. And if you don't see women as people, if you don't view them as your equal, then not only are you hurting any type of emotional intelligence that you can have when interacting with others of the opposite sex, but you're also damaging women when you think of them in that light.
There's just so many rooted expressions of misogyny, just frustrations let out by males who are, who feel like they have to exert this kind of stereotypical traditional masculinity. And just the existence of incels, they're such a dark, just such an unfortunate part of society, something that I wish that we didn't have to deal with or that didn't exist. But it's just really unfortunate to see how much problems like that stereotypical idea of masculinity as aroused, I guess.
I don't know if you guys know about this guy. His name is Elliot Rodger. He's considered like the god of the incel community. Have you heard of him? Yeah,
Yeah, I
Elliot
have.
Rodger.
God.
So, just to give some context, Elliot Rodger was a 22-year-old college student studying at the University of California, Santa Barbara, when he suddenly went on a mass murdering spree in the Isla Vista area, and he ended up murdering like at least a dozen people. And before that, what makes this so tragic is that he had filmed a video on YouTube and uploaded it on YouTube called The Day of Retribution. And he basically detailed his plan to exact revenge on all of the men that stole the women that he felt that he was entitled to, and why he hated women, especially because they felt like he felt like they were just naturally excluding him because he was inferior to the other men. But despite this, like in his video, he has like this really big air of superiority where he's just like, I will exact my revenge on you. I will make you pay. Why can't you like me? Look at me. I'm like everything you could ask for.
Wow, that is absolutely terrifying. I never heard of this guy. Oh my god. But actually, let's take a step back and compare that guy to toxic masculine ideals. So incels, they believe in an alpha male. This guy is obviously emotionally regressed since he responds to rejection with violence.
Mm-hmm.
So he checks off that box. He is overly aggressive because he murdered people, so he checks off that box. And he sees himself as superior, and he views women as objects. That's another box checked off. I can understand why he would be a god of some sort to these. I don't even know how to say this in a nice way. Socially detached group of people. He basically embodies all the things that absolute toxicity can create. I mean, this is. Do you know how recently this happened?
2014, I believe.
Oh my god! It's just something like that can even happen in the 21st century. I know that a lot of serial killers. I'm really into true crime. a lot of serial killers, they'll go on killing sprees of women because it's usually rooted in the fact that they have a bad relationship with their mother, which, I mean, that's neither here nor there, but, just a little tidbit. But they're kind of like the old school incels, like murderers from like the 70s and 80s who go on killing sprees of women because they've been denied, and so they just take their revenge. But I would have hoped that we would have become more progressive as a society.
The majority of incels have depression, autism, or body dysphoric disorder. So it's kind of interesting to see how they kind of align some other reasons that they might not be able to attract women, for example, due to their mental health, due to their personalities, and they kind of just root it into something that's harmful to women, something that's harmful to society in general.
Yeah, their mental health conditions, combined with just how men are expected to behave definitely creates an environment that isn't safe for them to express these things. They just choose to respond in the worst possible way.
Yeah, I would argue that they probably have a dangerously amount of narcissism while also having a dangerously low self-esteem, which I feel like is an interesting complex. But besides that, yeah, depression that can lead to aggravation and aggression towards others can be very, very, very dangerous. And I know that, obviously with depression, it can unfortunately lead to heightened suicide rates. I know that a lot of incels do have suicidal thoughts. I watched a video, I believe, on Vice where it was an incel community, and even though the things that they said when they were chatting were despicable, there would be times when members of that community would commit suicide, and it was just, for them, it was just seen as like, an average day, like that's just part of the trade. And it made me feel really sad, because when another part of toxic masculinity is the fact that seeking psychiatric help, seeking mental health help is seen as a weakness. Going to a therapist is seen as weak. Tying back to that emotional aggression. And so you have people who can easily be reformed and can get back on their feet and solve these types of illnesses if they just were able to find the help. And they have that mentality that they can't do so. And
I definitely agree. A lot of incels, they engage in self-diagnosis. They discourage going to therapists, seeking treatment, and it's just so unfortunate to see how their toxic ideals of masculinity is truly repressed them from being able to seek help, and that so many of them are dealing with severe depression, they're dealing with other types of mental illnesses, and while they're using the fact of being an incel to try and distract themselves from what they're truly feeling, in a way it's also ruining exactly what they're doing, because so many of them are killing themselves. They're just, every day their mental illness is getting worse and worse, and it's truly not helping by them pushing their feelings towards hating women instead.
Yeah, everyone always tries to find a scapegoat, but either that's where it becomes dangerous, when someone is that type has that type of mental illness and is that far gone, where you either have two outcomes. They either start to hurt other people, or they start hurting themselves, and both are just terrible.
Incel communities actually encourage their suicidal members to kill themselves, and they also recommend doing violent acts like committing shootings before actually doing so. It's just so, I don't even know how to properly explain how crazy it is, how scary it is that people like that exist, that you're just telling people to kill themselves or telling people to commit violent acts because they're not being masculine enough.
And while I was discussing this with a friend one time, this was a topic of discussion that it's just something that there's just so much to talk about because it's just so twisted. But they brought up this really interesting point about how the incel movement, in a way, is very intersectional in and of itself. And it's just really disgusting how it is, because a lot of these incels also look up to a lot of terrorist figures and a lot of mass murdering figures, regardless of whether or not they have shown any signs of inceldom. And like that one guy, you remember the Christchurch shooting from a few years ago, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy, he was very,
Yeah,
very active on incel forums, and this is something that people have only found out now. And so you see this intersection between discriminating against women and discriminating against those that you feel like just other people. Like the Muslim community was highly devastated by this crime, and you see this guy who had already been showing signs of aggression towards this group that he had basically primed himself to be at odds with. So it's just inceldom really just extends towards a lot of other toxic ideologies.
Yeah, I mean, Dylan Roof, I mean, that massacre, I feel like, just off note, I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough, because that looks like something like out of the depths of the terrifying periods of time during the civil rights movement, and the fact that you can still have a massacre where like 8 people are getting shot up in a black church is just terrifying. But I even argue that I don't know that Nick Cruz, the shooter of the of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High, was, and so I don't know that for sure, but I do know from interviews with students who had interacted with him before that fateful day, did talk about how he was overly aggressive, how girls would even try to become his friend, and that he would just become violent towards them and sort of attack them and things like that. And I feel like in some degree, even though I don't agree when men say that they're oppressed, I do agree that in some capacity, society is not doing these men right. We're not bringing up our boys correctly if things like this can happen.
I definitely agree with that. Although it's obviously not on the same scale as it is for women, and they're not being repressed, if oppressed at all, to the same extent. But there definitely are some issues that are going on within the male community. There's issues that society as a whole, the government, everyone needs to address and work towards solving. So I definitely do agree to that. Definitely, there's a lot of things that I feel like, are wrong that are happening to males and things like that. But I do think that, feminism or incels or some of the more toxic and harmful ways that people are approaching these issues is very wrong, very harmful to society as a whole.
I have to disclaim that everybody in this podcast as of current is a female, so we definitely don't have that male perspective, and we can't account for all of that, but this is just us speaking from what we've witnessed.
Definitely.
Yeah, we're speaking from personal experience, men that we know, and our own research.
All right.
See y'all next time.